Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever had someone pull away from you, only to wonder if they ever truly cared? What if I told you that the silence doesn't mean you were forgotten? It means you were remembered too deeply to face. He pulled away, but you still haunt his heart. You see, we often take someone pulling away as the end of the story. We say, if he left, he never cared. If he went cold, it was never real. But I want you to challenge that narrative. He felt something with you that he didn't expect. Not just attraction, not just chemistry. And when someone's not ready for that, they run. But just because he ran doesn't mean he forgot. You see, there's a version of you that lives rent-free in his memory. The way you laughed when you didn't know he was watching. The way you listened without trying to fix him. The way you made him feel safe, like he could finally exhale. He didn't forget you. That is what keeps echoing in his quiet moments, when the world slows down, when the noise fades. So no, he may not message you. He may not knock on your door. He may never say it out loud. But don't be fooled by the silence. Because in the stillness of his mind, just because he pulled away doesn't mean he stopped feeling something for you. That's one of the hardest truths to understand, especially when all you're left with is silence. We often equate distance with disinterest. We assume that if someone steps back, emotionally or physically, it must mean we didn't matter to them the way they mattered to us. But emotional distance doesn't always mean emotional erasure. In fact, the deeper the connection, the more terrifying it can be for someone who isn't emotionally ready to handle it. There are people in this world who crave closeness and yet fear it at the same time. They want to be known, but are terrified of being seen. And when someone like you comes along, someone who doesn't just look at them, but sees right through them, it can awaken emotions they've never fully dealt with. You didn't just make him feel wanted, you made him feel vulnerable. You created a space where his mask started to slip, where his walls began to crumble, and that's not something every man knows how to sit with. When a man pulls away, we often rush to blame ourselves. Was I too much? Was I too available? Did I scare him off by loving him too well? But those questions come from a place of self-doubt, not truth. What's more likely is this: you triggered something deeper in him. Not because you were doing anything wrong, but because you were doing something right. You were offering real emotional intimacy, not just surface-level validation. And for someone who has spent years managing, suppressing, or avoiding emotions, that kind of intimacy is overwhelming. That's why some men disappear not after a fight, but after a perfect day. That's why they go quite right after you share a beautiful connection, because it's in those moments, the soft, calm, intimate ones, that they realize they're no longer in control of how they feel. And losing that control terrifies them. It reminds them of old wounds they haven't healed, old stories they still carry, fears of abandonment or inadequacy that you didn't create, but that your love exposed. So when he pulled away, it wasn't necessarily a reflection of your worth. It was more likely a reflection of his readiness, or lack of it. Some people can't handle the weight of real connection, especially when they've built a life around avoidance. You didn't lose him because you weren't enough. You lost him because he wasn't ready to receive something real. But here's the part we often overlook. Even if he pulled away, that emotional imprint you left on him doesn't just disappear. People remember how we made them feel, especially when those feelings come from a rare, genuine place. You showed him something deeper. You offered a love he may have longed for, but never believed he could fully hold. And whether he admits it or not, that connection doesn't vanish just because he stepped away from it. It lingers. It lingers in the silence. It lingers in the spaces he tries to fill with distractions. It lingers in the moments he compares everyone else to you. You might be wondering if any of it was real, if all the laughter, the deep conversations, the quiet moments of closeness meant anything to him. And here's the truth you need to hear: your impact was real. What you gave wasn't a performance. It wasn't a manipulation. It was presence. You didn't just pass through his life, you changed the texture of it. You brought color to a space that might have been numb or guarded for a long time. And that kind of impact doesn't just fade because someone chose to walk away. There are people who can't fully grasp what they have when it's right in front of them. Not because they're ungrateful, but because they've never felt safe enough to accept it. And when you enter someone's life with clarity, with depth, with the kind of energy that doesn't ask for validation but offers understanding, that stays with them whether or not they have the language or the courage to express it. You showed up in a way that wasn't convenient, but consistent, and deep down he knew it. He may not have said it. He may not have shown it in the way you deserved, but he felt it. There are reasons certain people are hard to forget. It's not about looks. It's not about grand gestures. It's about energy. It's about how someone made us feel about ourselves when we were around them. You reminded him of the man he wanted to be. You saw past the distractions, past the hesitation, and into something more honest. And in a world that often rewards surface-level attention, being deeply seen is rare and unforgettable. He may have pulled away, but that doesn't mean your presence vanished from his mind. In fact, sometimes stepping back gives someone the exact space they need to truly feel your absence. And what hurts the most for them isn't losing someone who entertained them. It's losing someone who understood them, who held space without pressure, who stayed kind even when things felt uncertain, who didn't try to fix him, but offered him the safety to show up. You made him feel something real, maybe for the first time in a long time. And here's what people don't talk about enough. When someone experiences something genuine, it changes them. Even if they don't say thank you, even if they never come back, your words, your tone, your energy, it doesn't disappear. It becomes part of their emotional memory. It becomes something they unconsciously search for in other people, but rarely find. This is why you must not let someone else's emotional confusion make you question your clarity. You didn't imagine it. You didn't fabricate your impact. The connection you offered left a mark, and whether he was ready to hold it or not, he will carry it. Because real connection doesn't scream, it doesn't beg, it simply leaves an echo that never truly fades. When a man pulls away, it's easy to assume it's because he lost interest, because something changed in the way he feels about you. But more often than not, the reason runs far deeper, and it has very little to do with you. It's not always a shift in desire, but a surge of inner conflict, a battle within himself. Sometimes the pullback isn't rejection, it's fear in disguise. Fear of being vulnerable, fear of being seen, fear of getting too close to something that feels real. You may have opened a door inside him he wasn't prepared to walk through. And that door, emotional intimacy, connection, depth, is not something everyone is ready to face, no matter how much they think they want it. We forget that for some people, closeness is triggering. It pokes at old wounds. It reminds them of the parts of their past where trust was broken, where love was conditional, or where they were left behind. When someone hasn't healed from those experiences, intimacy doesn't always feel safe. It feels threatening. So when you come into his life and love him in a way that's calm, consistent, and honest, his nervous system might not recognize it as love. It might recognize it as danger. Not because you are dangerous, but because love to him has always been chaotic or uncertain. His instinct might be to retreat, to find distance, to pull back before he falls in too deep and loses control. He might not even understand that's what he's doing. It can look like confusion, mixed signals, or withdrawal. But behind it, there's often a silent fear. What if I open up and it falls apart again? Or, what if I'm not enough for this kind of love? This inner war plays out quietly. He might appear cold. He might act indifferent. But inside, there's tension between the part of him that wants to stay and the part that's terrified of what staying could mean. This is especially true for emotionally avoidant individuals, those who crave love but struggle to let it fully in. They learn to protect themselves by staying 1 foot out the door, not because they don't want connection, but because they associate it with loss, pain, or losing their sense of control. And so he pulls away, not because the connection was weak, but because it was strong. Too strong for where he is emotionally. Too confronting. Too vulnerable. You might be tempted to chase after him, to prove your worth, to remind him of what you had. But understand, this isn't about your value. This is about his readiness. This is about the emotional fight going on inside of him, one that you didn't cause and one you can't solve. What's important to remember is that this kind of internal conflict is invisible from the outside. You only see the behavior, the withdrawal, the silence, the detachment. But behind those actions is a person overwhelmed by emotions he may have never had the tools to process, a person who may genuinely care about you but is stuck in patterns of self-protection. That's why your kindness, your consistency, your presence left such a mark. Because for a moment, he felt something real, something his heart wanted, but his fear didn't know how to hold. You weren't too much. You were just more than he knew how to receive at that moment. And that's not your burden to carry. You made him feel seen in a way that most people never have. And that kind of experience is incredibly rare, especially for someone who has spent much of their life hiding behind emotional armor. We live in a world where so many connections are built on surface, level attraction, casual conversation, or mutual convenience. But every once in a while, someone comes along who looks past all that, who sees the subtle things, who notices what others overlook. That person was you. You saw beyond the way he spoke. You saw through the way he joked to cover up his insecurities. You heard what he wasn't saying. You picked up on the shifts in his energy, the moments when his words didn't match his eyes. You noticed the hesitation behind his confidence, the sadness behind his silence, and instead of walking away or trying to fix him, you stayed. You offered the kind of presence that said, "I see you, and you don't have to pretend with me." That's why he felt safe around you, even if he couldn't admit it. That's why he shared parts of himself he rarely reveals. Because you didn't require a performance. You didn't demand perfection. You gave him space to be human, flawed, and vulnerable. And for someone who has always had to be strong, who has been told to keep it together, to stay guarded, that was a gift he didn't know how much he needed until it was gone. When someone feels truly seen, it changes them, not just emotionally, but fundamentally. It touches something deep inside. It validates parts of them that have long been hidden. It brings light to places where they once felt invisible. And that's what you did. You didn't just notice him. You understood him. And for a man who may have spent most of his life being misunderstood, that was powerful. But here's the thing, being seen so clearly can also be terrifying. Because when someone sees you fully, it becomes much harder to hide from yourself. You become aware of the parts of you that you've avoided, the feelings you've buried, the patterns you haven't confronted. That's what your presence did for him. It reflected back the truth, both the beauty and the brokenness. And not everyone is ready to sit with that kind of mirror. So when he pulled away, it wasn't because you didn't matter. It wasn't because he didn't care. It was because your presence forced him to confront things he wasn't ready to deal with. He may have been used to shallow connections, where he could control the narrative, keep things light, stay detached. But with you, that wasn't possible. You saw too much. You got too close. You made him feel too deeply. And yet, even in his distance, that impact remains. He remembers the way you listened, not just to his words, but to his silences. He remembers how calm he felt in your presence, how accepted, how understood. That feeling doesn't fade just because someone walks away. It stays with them. It follows them into other connections, into lonely moments, into places where they wish they could feel that kind of peace again. Because in a world where most people only see what they want to see, you saw him for who he truly was. And that is something no one forgets. In a world full of masks, you were real. You didn't show up trying to impress, to manipulate, or to play a part. You showed up as yourself. That's why he can't forget you. Because while others gave him attention, you gave him presence. While others offered flattery, you offered understanding. You didn't try to compete for his time. You simply brought calm to his chaos. That kind of truth stands out in a world of performances. He may have been used to people wanting him for how he looked, what he could offer, or how exciting he seemed in the moment. but you didn't need him to perform. You didn't chase him for attention or validation. You connected with him from a place of depth, not need. That alone made you different, because most of the time, people seek relationships to feel something about themselves. But you were there to see him, not his image, not his potential, him as he was. And the thing is, people can sense when something is real. They may not always know how to name it, but they feel it. It disarms them. It makes them question the patterns they've been repeating. You didn't play the game. You didn't follow the usual script of pushing, pulling, probing. You just were. And that authenticity is rare. He may have tried to move on. He may have even convinced himself that he didn't need you, or that the connection wasn't that deep. But over time, he'll start to see the difference. He'll go out, meet others, maybe even start something new. But something will be missing. That invisible thread of honesty and depth he once felt with you won't be there. The ease, the stillness, the quiet strength of how you showed up. It doesn't exist in every connection, and he'll start to feel the contrast. Because eventually, the noise dies down. The new faces stop being exciting. The performances wear thin. And in the silence that follows, he'll remember how he felt when he was around you. He'll remember that with you, he didn't have to try so hard. He'll remember how you never forced your way into his life, but somehow became unforgettable in it. That's not something he can replace, even if he wanted to. The truth is, he can meet 10 other people and still not find what he found in you, because what you gave him wasn't built on intensity or drama. It was built on presence. You were honest. You were clear. You were consistent. That doesn't always spark fireworks at first, but it creates something even more powerful: impact, and impact lingers. Most people are addicted to the thrill of newness, to the chase. But you weren't about the chase. You were about the connection. You offered the kind of love that feels grounding, not just exciting. The kind of love that feels like home. And even if he walked away from it, he won't forget the feeling. He won't forget you. Because when you're the one person who didn't make him perform, who didn't need him to be anything other than himself, you become the one person he remembers the most. There's a kind of peace you gave him that he didn't know he needed until it was gone. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of quiet presence that made him feel safe, understood, and calm without having to explain anything. And now, even though you're not there anymore, that peace still echoes. It's not your words he misses most. It's the stillness you brought into his life. The feeling that, when he was around you, everything slowed down just enough for him to breathe. You didn't just offer love. You offered relief. And that's something a lot of people don't realize they're receiving until it's no longer there. You weren't trying to fix him. You weren't trying to force him into something he wasn't ready for. You just held space. You listened. You accepted. And in a world where he may have always felt the pressure to perform, to be strong, to hide his mess, you were the first person who didn't need him to do any of that. Now that you've gone quiet, it's not your absence that haunts him. It's the contrast. The contrast between the peace you gave and the noise that returned after you walked away. You see, we don't just miss people. We miss the version of ourselves we felt safe enough to be around them. And with you, he felt a kind of safety he probably never even admitted to himself. The way you held his emotions without judgment, the way your energy softened the sharp edges of his day. You were calm in human form. That's why your silence now feels louder than your presence ever did. Because when someone becomes your emotional anchor, even for a short time, their absence feels like floating without direction. You didn't need to argue. You didn't need to prove your worth. All you had to do was step back, and suddenly, he felt the weight of everything you carried for him, everything you softened for him, everything you understood without asking. People often think that making an impact means being the most unforgettable, the most exciting, the most intense. But in truth, it's often the softest energy that lingers the longest. The person who brought peace into our chaos. The one who made us feel okay when we weren't okay. You were that for him. And now that peace is something he's trying to replicate in other places. with other people, but it's not the same. Because it didn't come from the situation. It came from you. You taught him something simply by being who you are. You showed him what it feels like to be emotionally safe, to be seen without being pressured, to be close to someone without the fear of being pushed or judged. And now, in your silence, he feels that void more than he's willing to admit. That silence reminds him of the peace he once had but didn't know how to hold on to. He may not have the words for it. He may not even be conscious of the full weight of what he lost.